Chapter 199 Cliffhanger. Crap. Jumping into the bottomless dark abyss, Sonny briefly regretted every decision he had ever made in his life. How did he end up in this situation? Where did he go wrong? However, there was no time for self-reflection. He wasn't ready to see his whole life flash before his eyes yet. There were more pressing matters. Before the momentum of his jump waned, Sonny summoned the prowling thorn. By the time the triangular dagger materialized in his hand, he was already beginning to fall. Not wasting any time, Sonny threw it with as much power as he could while simultaneously sending the shadow from his hand onto the blade of the kunai. The throwing dagger flashed in the darkness of the underground cavern, streaked the wide chasm, and embedded itself into the hard rock on the other side of it. Because of the enhancement of the shadow, it got deeply lodged in the stone. Yes. A moment later, the invisible string connecting the prowling thorn to Sonny's wrist drew tight. Instantly, his hand was violently jerked forward. Holding on for his dear life, Sonny swung through the darkness with incredible speed. Behind him, dozens of skeletons plummeted into the chasm, with more being pushed down with each second. However, he was already far away. Ha! Bite it, you bastards! A couple of seconds later, all humor was smashed out of him by the hard impact against the opposite wall of the crevice. Sonny tried to soften the blow a little, but it still hurt like crazy. His bones groaned, on the verge of breaking apart. A couple of them probably did. Sonny blacked out for a moment or two. When he came back to his senses, his wrist was in agony, with the invisible string of the prowling thorn slowly cutting deep into its skin. Hissing, Sonny gripped the thin string with his other hand and relieved a part of the pressure. Then, he looked up. 10 or so meters above him, 5 pale faces hovered above the edge of the cliff. On them were written expressions of horror, shock, and astonishment. Oh. Right. I guess they don't know about this memory of mine. To the cohort, his desperate trick must have looked like simple suicide. From the perspective of people who didn't know about the secret enchantment of the prowling thorn, Sonny just took a running start and jumped into the abyss, only to disappear into its darkness without a trace. It was as though he had chosen to sacrifice his life to give the others a chance to escape. Like some sort of a stupid hero would. Do they even know me? Like I'd ever do something like that. Swinging on the invisible string, Sonny strained his aching chest and yelled, "Hey, idiots! I'm down here!" Slowly, 4 of the 5 faces turned to look straight down. Their expressions were rather comical. Cassie simply tilted her head. But her expression was priceless as well. Grinning, Sonny began to climb up. Since the string of the prowling thorn could change its length at will, he commanded it to shorten and rode comfortably all the way up, stepping lightly on the vertical wall of the chasm from time to make the process faster. Soon, he climbed over the edge of the cliff and sprawled on the cold ground, breathing heavily. The rest of the cohort just stared at him. What? Effie was the first to speak. Glad you're alive, Sonny. But also, what the hell? How did you do that? He simply threw her the kunai. Once the huntress bent down to pick it up, Sonny pulled on the invisible string and made the dagger fly back into his hand. Oh, that was a piece of cake. Nothing that a knife and a piece of string can't solve, more or less. He decided to omit the fact that he had almost soiled his pants in the few short moments between jumping off the edge of the chasm and successfully embedding the prowling thorn into the rocks on the other side of it. Effie blinked a couple of times, then slowly straightened herself up. Cool memory. Where did you get it? Sonny dismissed the kunai and tiredly waved his hand. You know those porcupine monsters back in the city? I got it off one of those. With that, the others left him alone. They were all hurt and dead tired, too. Everyone needed to rest and patch up their wounds. Nephi's made a move to try and heal them, but was stopped by Effie. The huntress darkly shook her head. Not yet. There's one last hurdle to overcome. We'll need you to be at the top of your game. Changing Star glanced at her, lingered for a few moments, but then sat back down. Out here, the word of the Pathfinder was the law. If Effie said that Nephi needed to save her strength, then she had to obey. Sonny was too exhausted to care. He knew that he was not going to bleed out thanks to the blood weave, and that was enough for now. He just wanted to rest. Some time later, he heard a shuffling sound and looked up to see Kai sitting down near him. The charming archer looked way too pretty and put together for a person who had just lived through the same mayhem as them, but Sonny was starting to suspect that this infuriating trait was just something he would have to come to terms with. Maybe Kai had some weird attribute that made him look good no matter the circumstance. Looking at the beautiful young man, Sonny sighed and said, "Hey, Knight. How are you doing?" Kai scratched the back of his head and answered, "All right, I guess." "That was intense back there, huh?" Sonny nodded. "Yeah. So, what's up?" The charming archer hesitated for a bit. "Nothing, really. I just wanted to say 3 things to you." What a strange guy. "Oh? All right, go on." Kai looked at him thoughtfully and said, "Well, first of all, I now fully understand what you meant when you said that you are crazy. Because that jump of yours, that was really crazy." Sonny chuckled. "I guess so. I'm alive though, aren't I?" The archer gave him a nod and smiled. "Another thing I wanted to say is that I also understood how you managed to survive all those months in the ruins. Your swordsmanship. I've never seen anything like it. I think that very few people in the Dark City would survive a clash against you. So, everything makes more sense now." Sonny didn't know how to feel about that praise. On one hand, it was nice to be acknowledged for something he worked so hard on. On the other hand, he still preferred being considered a cowardly weakling. It made killing fools far easier. He shrugged. "Thanks, I guess. What is the third thing?" Kai was silent for a long time, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, he shook his head and cautiously said, "Right. About that jump of yours, you do remember that I can fly, right? So I could have carried you over the chasm, no problem. So, why did you do it?" Sonny stared at him silently for a while, an inexorable expression on his face. Goddammit. To be honest, in the chaos of it all, he did forget about this crucial detail. After a long stretch of awkward silence, Sonny opened his mouth and said in a flat tone, "Oh, you know. It just seemed like a good idea at the moment." Kai blinked and gave him a strange look. A good idea?" Sonny cleared his throat, then glared at the charming young man. "It worked, didn't it? So, let's not talk about it again, ever. Okay?" Chapter 200 Descent. After a while, Sonny regained enough of his senses to warily look around. The tunnel they were currently in was somewhat different from those they had traversed while fighting the horde of undead monsters. It looked more weathered and decrepit, with its walls and floor smoothed and uneven, as though eroded by something over the course of countless years. What's worse, it was wet. With a cold shiver, Sonny realized that they were surrounded by puddles of black water. The smell of sea salt permeated the air. Looking up, he found the tall figure of the boisterous huntress and asked in a raspy voice, "Where are we?" Effie glanced at him and gestured up. 100 meters or so below the surface, pretty much exactly under the city wall. He stared at her blankly, slowly comprehending the meaning of these words. The huntress gave him a nod. "Yeah, you guessed correctly. Come night, this place is going to be full of seawater. That chasm behind us is what prevents the catacombs from being flooded by the dark sea." She sighed tiredly. "So, unless we want to drown or be eaten by some depth dweller, we need to get out of here as soon as possible." Sonny closed his eyes, imagining a roaring torrent of black water erupting from the mouths of countless tunnels and falling into the abyssal chasm like waterfalls made of pure darkness. Yeah, if they were still underground when that happened, sea monsters would be the least of their problems. The sea itself would kill them. Luckily, the day was still young. Effie's words served as a signal. A few moments later, Nephi's rose to her feet and glanced at the members of the cohort. Her pale face was calm and composed. Time to go. Gather your strength. With sighs and groans of pain, everyone stood up. Sunny was the last one to follow suit. Ouch, that hurts. I'm really starting to wonder if fighting Harus was a better choice. But no, it wasn't. Terrible as it might have been, the battle with the skeletons was at least predictable. The damned hunchback, on the other hand, was a complete unknown. There was nothing worse than facing an enemy that you knew nothing about. As the cohort headed deeper into the tunnel, Sunny caught up with Effie and asked with a hint of idle curiosity in his voice. By the way, how do you even know your way around the catacombs? It wasn't like she could have leisurely explored these deadly tunnels alone. The huntress gave him a dubious look and shrugged. This knowledge is sort of passed down between the outer settlement hunters. I've been here a couple of times before, trying to escape from especially terrible nightmare creatures. Although, to be honest, I only descended this deep into the catacombs once. Effie shivered. I was new in the Dark City at that time. Back then, the strongest hunter in the outer settlement sort of took me under her wing. We went down here with an entire party. Sunny scratched the back of his head and grimaced when his battered body protested against the sudden movement. Yeah? That party must have been very strong, to return from this place alive. The huntress glanced at him and smiled darkly. Who said anything about returning alive? Actually, they all died. I was the only one to survive. Sunny stared at her for a long time, and then asked, If they all died, then why the hell did you bring us here? Effie shrugged. Because no matter how strong that party was, they weren't even close to this one. Do you even realize how powerful the 6 of us are, all put together? Goddamn. I wouldn't want to be our enemy. Then she hesitated for a few moments and added, Plus, this time, I know what we're going to face. We'll get out of here in one piece, trust me. Sunny wasn't a particularly trusting person, but at this point, he didn't really have a choice. Leaving the tall huntress alone, he walked in silence for a while. The tunnels were now strongly angled down. With each minute, the cohort was descending deeper and deeper underground. Slowly, his curiosity awakened. Now that the harrowing battle against the army of the dead was behind them, Sunny began to wonder about something peculiar. Where exactly did all those human skeletons come from? There were hundreds, if not thousands of them down here in the catacombs. Even if every hunter that had ever lived in the outer settlement died in these tunnels, their number wouldn't account for that much. Not to mention that people who perished in the Dark City tended to end up eaten by some terrible monster, their bones pulverized into dust by its teeth. His pointless pondering was interrupted by Effie, who suddenly gestured for the cohort to stop. After discussing something with Nephi, she gave her a nod and turned to the rest of them. Listen up. We're close to the central chamber of this maze. The exit to the surface is right ahead. However, getting to it won't be easy. The tall huntress hesitated, and then said, If we want to make it outside, we will have to act fast. There's a big fat bastard of a nightmare creature that lives in that chamber. However, it takes time for it to fully wake up. So, don't stop to look at it, don't panic, don't lose your cool. It might look scary, but if you follow Neff and do what she tells you to do, you should be alright. She waited for a bit to make sure that everyone understood her meaning, and then grinned. Alright. If everyone is ready, let's go meet the Lord of the Dead. Wha? Lord of the Dead? Not liking the sound of this name one bit, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard and reluctantly followed after Effie. Soon, they entered a giant underground chamber. Once Sunny saw what was inside of it, his eyes grew wide. He finally understood where all those skeletal wraiths came from. He also understood where the inhabitants of the ancient city had disappeared to. They were all here. Chapter 201 Lord of the Dead. The giant underground chamber was circular in shape and as immense as the grand hall of the bright castle. Its walls were built out of the same gray stone slabs as the mighty walls of the dark city, but unlike them, the walls of the chamber were covered with whispering streams of cold, nebulous black water. In the center of it, a vast mountain of human bones rose from the ground, reaching almost halfway to the distant ceiling. Thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of people must have perished to create it. With a harrowing realization, Sunny finally understood where the people who built the ancient city and the impregnable wall surrounding it had disappeared to. They were all here, piled onto each other in this vile monument of death. This horrid dark chamber was their final resting place. An old memory suddenly surfaced in his mind. Back beneath the branches of the soul tree, Cassie had seen a vision of a blood-soaked hill formed from countless corpses. On top of it, a tiny black seed was floating in a pool of blood. Was there a similar mountain of bones hiding under the soil of the ashen barrow? Was that how the soul devourer had been born? Sunny shifted his gaze, only now noticing the veins of crimson coral growing from the harrowing hill of white bones, almost like muscle tissue of some colossal creature. Following the coral pillars up, he finally saw that the dome of the immense chamber was broken, with pale sunlight streaming through the breach and falling on the ghastly visage below. A giant stone hand was reaching down through the broken dome, its palm open, as though trying to caress the mountain formed from the bones of those people who had once populated this dark, forsaken land. Looking at the stone hand, Sunny suddenly realized where they were. The vast underground chamber was situated directly underneath the headless statue of the graceful woman who had once saved them from drowning in the black waters of the cursed sea. One of her hands was raised toward the heavens, as if trying to embrace them. The other had broken off and fell down thousands of years ago, lying in the mud at the base of the giant statue. Reaching into the depths of hell, that was the hand Sunny was looking at right now. It was also their way out of here. Doofus! Wake up! Brought back to reality by Effie's yell, he shuddered and looked around with a new understanding. So the exit the huntress had told them about was the breach in the dome of the underground chamber. With Kai's aspect ability, and the help of the golden rope, escaping through it was not going to be a problem. But where was this Lord of the Dead that she had mentioned? From Effie's colorful description, Sunny had expected to see a giant monster slumbering in the heart of the catacombs. If memory served, her exact words were, "A big fat bastard of a nightmare creature." But he couldn't see anything. Unless... His eyes narrowed. And just at that moment, the mountain of bones suddenly moved. When the mountain moved, everything suddenly made sense. At first, Sunny thought that the unknown creature was sleeping inside the ghastly hill of bones. But then he realized that no, it wasn't. The mountain itself was the nightmare creature. This was the Lord of the Dead. Each of the countless bones piled on top of each other in the underground chamber was a part of its body. For a moment, Sunny was paralyzed by fear. Fat bastard? That is what you call a fat bastard. But then, the disparate pieces of information clicked in his mind, assembling into a vivid chain of cause and effect. Of course. Why didn't I realize sooner? The mountain of bones, the horde of immortal skeletons, the Lord of the Dead, it all connected. The nightmare creature in front of him was a fallen tyrant. Tyrants were a fifth step in the evolution of nightmare creatures, and the name of that class was not coincidental. The fifth step represented rule and authority. That's why the blind monstrosity he had faced on the slopes of the Black Mountain was named a king, and that's why the abomination in front of him was named a lord. Classes differed from each other in terms of pure might, but most of the distinction between them was caused by a more fundamental reason. Higher classes possessed characteristics that, while not directly affecting the quantity of their power, gave it a qualitative change. For example, while beasts were mindless, demons and those above them were intelligent. That's why a demon, even if it was only slightly stronger than a monster, was in fact 10 times more dangerous. The characteristic of the tyrant class was that these nightmare creatures were capable of creating and controlling large amounts of lesser creatures. The Mountain King's larva that Sunny had slain during his first trial, which was born when a tiny worm living inside the Mountain King's body entered the corpse of a dying slave, was one such lesser creature. However, this power had its limitations. The minions created by a tyrant couldn't be of the same rank as it. That's why the larva was a dormant beast, while Mountain King itself was awakened. Similarly, while the skeletons that the cohort had faced were awakened, they had to be created by a fallen tyrant. And something told Sunny that their immortality was tied to the Lord of the Dead, too. If someone wanted to destroy the undead army, they would have to destroy the abominable bone Colossus first. Said Colossus, meanwhile, was slowly waking up right in front of Sunny. And if when it did... Damnation! Nervously gripping the midnight shard, he glanced at Nephi's. The golden rope was already in her hands, and she was passing it to Kai. Before the beautiful archer could take it, though, the mountainous creature suddenly rippled. A moment later, a twisted pillar of bones shot from its body, flying in their direction with the force of a siege ram.